Rowan had always been drawn to the wild, a place where nature spoke in whispers and the wind told stories of distant lands. For years, he had lived on the edge of civilization in a small cabin, a refuge from the noise and haste of modern life. But on one particularly bitter winter's day, the call of the wilderness grew too strong to ignore. Determined to reconnect with the raw beauty of nature and to seek solace in its silent embrace, Rowan set out on a solitary journey into the frozen wilderness. The morning of his departure was gray and overcast, the sky heavy with the promise of a storm. Rowan stepped outside his modest cabin, bundled in layers of weathered clothing and sturdy boots worn by countless treks. As he locked the door behind him, he took a deep breath, savoring the crisp, icy air that filled his lungs. The world outside was a monochrome of whites and grays, with snow blanketing the ground and frost shimmering on every surface. Even the trees, usually so full of life in the summer, stood in silent reverence, their bare branches etched against a pale sky. Rowan's heart beat with anticipation as he began his journey. He had chosen a trail that wound through a dense forest and up into the higher reaches of the mountains, a path less traveled, where nature reigned supreme, and the only sounds were the crunch of snow underfoot and the occasional distant call of a lone bird. With every step, the solitude of the wilderness enveloped him like a thick, comforting blanket. There was a certain purity in the silence, a chance to escape the burdens of his past, and to let the present moment wash over him. As he made his way deeper into the forest, the terrain grew rougher. The familiar paths he once knew had been transformed by the recent winter storm into an icy labyrinth. Snowdrifts towered like silent sentinels along the trail, and icy gusts whipped past him, carrying with them a chill that penetrated even the thickest layers of his clothing. Yet, despite the harsh conditions, Rowan pressed on, driven by an inner resolve that had been honed through years of living in the northern frontier. The forest was alive with subtle movement. Occasionally he would catch a glimpse of a fox darting between the trees or the fleeting shadow of a deer stepping gracefully over the snow. But for the most part, the wilderness was serene, a vast, unspoiled expanse of nature, unburdened by the clamor of city life. In that silence, Rowan found a kind of solace, a space where his thoughts could roam freely and he could come to terms with the hardships of his past. Every now and then, he paused to admire the beauty around him. He marveled at the way the early morning light played upon the snow, turning the landscape into a glittering wonderland. He knelt by a small, frozen stream, watching the delicate patterns of frost form on the surface as water struggled to flow beneath the icy crust. In moments like these, Rowan felt as though he were witnessing the very heartbeat of the earth, a rhythm that pulsed with both fragility and strength. As the day wore on, the weather began to shift. Dark clouds gathered overhead, and the wind picked up, howling like a wounded beast. The once gentle snowfall transformed into a fierce blizzard that reduced the world to a swirling vortex of white. Rowan found himself battling against the elements. The wind was relentless, driving cold slivers of ice into his face and threatening to push him off course. His vision blurred by snow, he clutched his walking stick tightly, each step forward a small victory against the fury of nature. In that moment, Rowan realized that he was truly alone in the vast frozen wilderness, a solitary figure pitted against the raw power of nature. But rather than feeling fear, he felt a deep sense of awe and reverence. The storm, with all its violent energy, was a reminder that he was a small part of something much larger, a single thread in the intricate tapestry of life. It was humbling, and it stirred in him a determination to persevere. Rowan recalled the stories his grandfather had told him about early explorers and trappers who had navigated similar storms. He thought of the sacrifices they made and the lessons they learned from the unforgiving land. Drawing strength from these memories, he continued onward, his mind a mixture of gratitude for the opportunity to experience such beauty and sorrow for the challenges that lay ahead. The path was treacherous, and at one point, Rowan nearly lost his footing on a slick patch of ice. His heart raced as he steadied himself with the help of his walking stick, silently thanking his years of experience in these wild lands. Every fall, every near miss with the biting cold, served as a reminder of the dangers that lurked in the shadows of the forest. Yet, with each challenge, he grew more resolute, more connected to the land that both tested and nurtured him. In the midst of the storm, as he trudged through waist-deep snow, Rowan stumbled upon a clearing where the wind seemed to momentarily ease its grip. In the center of the clearing stood an ancient pine, its gnarled trunk and sprawling branches a testament to centuries of survival. The sight of the old tree stirred something within Rowan, a feeling of kinship with the steadfast guardian of the wilderness. He sat beneath its boughs for a long while, allowing the tree's silent strength to fill him with hope. The storm still raged around him, but in that small haven he felt a momentary peace. As the clearing began to offer refuge, Rowan took out his small notebook, a habit he maintained to record his thoughts and observations during his journeys. He scribbled down impressions of the storm, the beauty of the swirling snow, and the raw power of the wind. His handwriting, usually so steady, wavered with emotion as he reflected on the impermanence of life and the enduring spirit of nature. It was in these moments of introspection that he felt truly alive, every cell in his body resonating with the pulse of the earth. After a while, the clouds began to break, and the storm's fury subsided into a gentle snowfall. The once chaotic winds mellowed into soft whispers that caressed the landscape. In the clarity that followed, Rowan rose from his seat beneath the ancient pine, feeling rejuvenated despite the exhaustion that weighed on his limbs. The world had transformed around him, a shimmering, tranquil expanse that beckoned him to continue his journey. With cautious optimism, Rowan set off once more, the memory of the storm etched into his soul as both a challenge overcome and a reminder of nature's unpredictable beauty. His journey through the frozen wilderness was not just a physical expedition, but a voyage into the depths of his own resilience and determination. He thought of the countless souls who had come before him, who had faced the wild with nothing but a steely resolve and an unyielding desire to survive. In the vast solitude of the winter landscape, he found not only the echo of their footsteps, but also a promise that even in the harshest conditions, hope could still be kindled. Every step that day was filled with a quiet, determined purpose. The landscape, still bathed in the soft glow of a clearing sky, seemed to whisper encouragement to him. The challenges of the wilderness, the slippery paths, the biting cold, the endless drifts of snow, became symbols of life's many hardships. Yet, just as the clearing under the ancient pine had offered him solace, Rowan knew that every hardship carried within it the seed of a new beginning. The frozen world around him was as unforgiving as it was beautiful, a duality that mirrored the complexities of the human heart. As Rowan walked further, his mind wandered to the people he had left behind, a past life filled with warmth and companionship that now seemed like a distant memory. The loneliness of the wilderness, however, was not without its gifts. In the vast silence, he discovered the power of introspection and the strength to rebuild his inner world. With every gust of wind and every crunch of snow beneath his boots, Rowan shed the layers of despair that had once defined him. He was not just surviving. He was slowly learning to thrive, drawing inspiration from the wild around him. At last, after hours of solitary travel, Rowan reached the edge of a gently sloping hill that overlooked a vast valley. The sight before him was breathtaking, a panorama of undulating fields blanketed in snow, interspersed with clusters of evergreen trees and dotted with the occasional glimmer of a frozen stream. The sun, now high in the sky, cast long shadows across the valley, and for the first time that day, Rowan felt a surge of hope that warmed him more than any fire could. In that moment, he paused to reflect on his journey so far. The cold, treacherous path, the howling winds, and the quiet moments of solitude had all contributed to a profound inner transformation. He realized that the wilderness, with all its harshness, had a way of revealing the truth about who we are. In the face of nature's challenges, the true measure of one's spirit is revealed, not by the comforts of civilization, but by the strength to carry on when every step feels impossible. With renewed determination, Rowan began the descent from the hill, his heart lighter and his purpose clearer than ever. He knew that the journey ahead would still be fraught with difficulties, but the beauty he had witnessed in that valley reminded him that even the darkest winters eventually give way to spring. The frozen wilderness was a teacher, and its lessons of endurance, humility, and hope were etched into every blade of snow and every whisper of the wind. As he made his way back toward his cabin, Rowan promised himself that he would return to the wilderness whenever life grew too heavy. He understood that the wild was not merely a backdrop to his struggles, but a living, breathing part of his healing. In the silent majesty of the frozen world, he had discovered that even the coldest landscapes could nurture the warmest of hearts. Rowan's solitary journey into the frozen wilderness was more than an escape. It was a pilgrimage, a quest to rediscover the parts of himself that had been lost in the noise of everyday life. Each step taken on the icy trail was a step toward renewal, a reaffirmation that in the heart of the wild, every challenge was an opportunity to grow stronger. And as he trudged through the lingering snow, guided by the gentle light of the winter sun, Rowan knew that no matter how bitter the cold, the promise of a new day would always prevail. Rowan had been trekking through the frozen expanse for hours when the wilderness began to reveal its darker secrets. The storm's fury had subsided into a bitter, lingering chill that seeped into every crevice of the ancient forest. As he navigated a narrow, winding path between towering, snow-laden pines, a faint sound, a soft, almost inaudible whimper, reached his ears. It was a sound that carried sorrow and desperation, a call that seemed to echo from the very heart of the wilderness. Intrigued and uneasy, Rowan slowed his pace. The forest, which moments ago had seemed like a serene monument to nature's beauty, now felt ominous. Shadows stretched in the dim light, and the silence was punctuated by that forlorn cry. His mind raced with questions. What could be making such a sound in this vast, unforgiving land? He tightened his grip on his walking stick and moved cautiously toward the source, each step measured and deliberate. After what felt like an eternity, Rowan reached a small clearing where the trees opened up to reveal a haunting sight. Half buried in a mound of fresh snow was a large, gaunt shape that sent a shiver down his spine. As he drew nearer, the figure came into focus, a majestic wolf, its once proud coat now marred by dirt and the brutal imprint of a metal wire. The wolf lay in a twisted, pained heap, its eyes half closed and its breaths coming in ragged, desperate puffs of vapor. The sight was both tragic and alarming. Rowan's heart pounded as he approached slowly. He had seen wolves before, elusive and free, symbols of the untamed wild. But never had he witnessed one in such distress, a creature caught in a cruel trap, robbed of its dignity, and left to suffer under the relentless weight of the winter. The sight struck him like a bolt of lightning, awakening in him a fierce urgency to help, even as his rational mind warned him of the dangers inherent in dealing with a wounded predator. He knelt down in the biting cold, his breath fogging in the air, and studied the wolf's condition. The metal wire had wrapped tightly around the animal's leg, the rusted edges biting into its flesh. Every small movement of the wolf sent a jolt of pain through its body, and its eyes, clouded with exhaustion, glimmered with a silent plea for mercy. In that moment, time seemed to slow as Rowan weighed his options. The rational part of him knew that approaching a wild, injured animal could provoke an unpredictable, even violent reaction. Yet the raw emotion in the wolf's eyes, an expression of vulnerability so stark against the harsh backdrop of the wilderness, compelled him to act. Rowan recalled the lessons of his youth, the tales of courageous souls who risked everything to save those in need, even when danger lurked around every corner. He had always believed in the power of compassion, in the idea that every life, no matter how wild or fierce, deserved a chance to survive. With his heart pounding and his resolve hardening like the ice around him, Rowan made a decision. He would free the wolf from its torment. Summoning every ounce of courage he possessed, Rowan reached for the small hunting knife tucked away in his coat pocket. Its blade, though modest, symbolized his determination to confront the cruelty that had ensnared the creature. His fingers trembled as he positioned himself close to the wolf. The animal's eyes, a mix of pain, fear, and a trace of hope, met his, and for a moment, an unspoken understanding passed between them, a silent contract forged in the cold, bleak light of that winter day. Slowly and deliberately, Rowan pressed the knife to the wire. He could feel the tension in the metal, a harsh reminder of the suffering it had caused. Every movement was calculated, every second stretched into an eternity as the wind whispered through the trees. The wolf's body shuddered with each tiny twitch, its low whimpers mingling with the soft rustle of snow around them. Rowan's breath was heavy, his mind a storm of thoughts and emotions. He knew that one wrong move could send the creature into a panic, or worse, inflict additional harm. Yet, he could not bear the thought of leaving the animal to die in such agony. Minutes passed as Rowan carefully worked to loosen the wire. The sound of metal straining against bone was almost unbearable in the profound silence of the forest. Then, with a sudden, sharp snap, the wire gave way. For a moment, everything was still. The wolf lay motionless in the snow, and Rowan's heart clenched as he waited, fearing the worst. Slowly, the wolf stirred, its eyes fluttered open, and it let out a soft, tentative groan. Though it was weak, the spark of life in its gaze was undeniable. Rowan exhaled deeply, a mixture of relief and sorrow washing over him. The creature was still in pain, and its injuries were severe, but it had been given a reprieve from its suffering. As he knelt beside the wolf, Rowan felt an overwhelming surge of empathy. He could not leave the animal to its fate, not after witnessing such raw vulnerability. Despite the inherent risks, he resolved to help, to do everything in his power to nurse this wounded soul back to health. Gently, he reached out and stroked the wolf's matted fur, his touch careful and reassuring. "I'm here to help you," he murmured softly, his voice barely audible over the whispering wind. The wolf's eyes, now filled with a flicker of cautious trust, met his. In that quiet exchange, a profound bond began to form, a bond born not of domestication or control, but of mutual recognition of suffering and the desperate need for healing. Rowan knew that the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges. The wilderness was as unforgiving as it was beautiful, and the wolf's road to recovery would be long and uncertain. Yet, in that moment, with the creature's fragile life cradled in his arms and the bitter cold of the forest pressing in around them, Rowan made a silent vow. He would do whatever it took to save this majestic animal, even if it meant risking his own life in the process. With the wolf slowly regaining some strength, Rowan carefully wrapped it in his worn, heavy jacket, a small, makeshift attempt at providing warmth and comfort. He surveyed the surrounding landscape, the snow-covered clearing, the towering pines standing as silent witnesses, and the distant echo of a storm that had long passed. Each element of the scene reinforced the stark reality of the moment, a life hanging in the balance, rescued by a single act of compassion in a world that often seemed indifferent to suffering. As Rowan prepared to transport the wounded wolf, he hesitated for just a moment longer, his gaze lingering on the creature's frail form. The wolf's eyes, though dim, held a resilience that belied its current state. It was as if the animal knew that this was not the end, that a new chapter of survival, of hope, might just be beginning. With a final, resolute nod, Rowan lifted the wolf, feeling the creature's weak body tremble against his own. Every step toward his cabin was a battle against nature's harsh elements, the weight of responsibility and the urgency of time pressing down on him. The forest around him seemed to blur into a mosaic of white and gray as he made his way back, the distant howls of the wind now a solemn soundtrack to his mission. In that long, arduous trek, Rowan's mind replayed the haunting image of the trapped wolf, the sight that had awakened a long, dormant compassion within him. The memory was both a reminder of nature's cruelty and a beacon of hope that even the harshest circumstances could be softened by a single act of kindness. By the time Rowan reached the threshold of his modest cabin, the sun was beginning its slow ascent above the horizon, casting a pale light that danced across the snow. He paused at the door, his heart still pounding from the emotional weight of his discovery. Inside, the cabin offered a refuge of warmth and solace, a stark contrast to the desolation of the wilderness outside. With gentle care, Rowan laid the wolf on a thick, worn blanket near the flickering fireplace, hoping that the comforting heat would seep into its battered body and begin the healing process. In that quiet moment, as the embers of the fire glowed softly and the wolf's labored breaths filled the silence, Rowan felt the enormity of what he had just witnessed. The haunting discovery in the frozen wilderness was not merely an isolated event. It was a testament to the cruelty that sometimes lurked in the world, and a stark reminder of the capacity for compassion that resided within him. The image of the wolf, with its pain and vulnerability, would forever be etched into his memory, a call to arms against indifference, and a promise that he would not let the suffering of the innocent go unanswered. Rowan sat by the fire long into the morning, the events of the night replaying in his mind like a poignant dream. His thoughts wandered to the countless creatures of the wilderness, each facing their own battles against the forces of nature and human cruelty. And as he watched the soft, healing light of day break through the window, Rowan made a silent vow. He would do whatever it took to protect those who could not protect themselves, and in doing so, honor the unspoken bond that had formed between him and the wounded wolf. The memory of that haunting discovery, the bitter cold, the desperate whimpers, the painful struggle to free the majestic creature, became the catalyst for a new chapter in Rowan's life. It was a moment that shifted his path from one of solitary survival to a journey of empathy and resolve. The wild, in all its unforgiving splendor, had revealed a truth, that even amidst the harshest conditions, a spark of kindness could ignite a transformation so profound that it would resonate far beyond the frozen wilderness. And so, as the day grew brighter and the wolf began to show subtle signs of recovery, Rowan embraced the challenge ahead. With each careful step he took toward nurturing the creature, he rediscovered a part of himself that had been lost in the shadows of despair. In that shared moment of fragile hope, the haunting discovery in the wilderness was reborn as a promise that even the darkest nights can give way to the light of compassion, and that from the heart of cruelty, love can emerge triumphant. Rowan's heart pounded like a drum as he stood there, frozen in the biting cold of the winter forest. In front of him lay the suffering wolf, ensnared in a cruel, rusted wire trap that had dug deep into its leg. The creature's eyes, clouded with pain and exhaustion, pleaded silently for mercy. For a long, agonizing moment, time seemed to slow down around him, and the world narrowed to the wolf's pained gaze and the howling wind. Every fiber of Rowan's being screamed caution. He knew that wild animals were unpredictable, especially when injured. The instinct to flee battled with a deeper, almost primal urge to help. Thoughts of danger raced through his mind. What if the wolf lashed out in pain? What if its ferocity, honed over years of surviving in the wild, turned violent in its desperation? Yet, amid that swirl of fear, a powerful compassion stirred within him, a compassion that recalled memories of his own vulnerabilities and the kindness that had once been shown to him during his darkest days. Rowan took a deep breath, trying to steady his trembling hands as he contemplated the decision before him. The wire was biting into the wolf's leg, and with each labored breath, the animal's suffering deepened. He remembered his childhood, when his grandmother taught him that every creature, no matter how fierce or wild, deserved compassion. That lesson echoed in his mind now, challenging him to rise above his natural instincts of self-preservation. He knelt slowly beside the trapped wolf, his knees creaking in protest against the cold, hard ground. The winter forest around him was eerily silent, except for the relentless gusts of wind that whipped through the bare trees. In that desolate moment, Rowan's mind was filled with conflicting thoughts, fear mingled with empathy, uncertainty tangled with resolve. He recalled the faces of people who had once reached out to him in his time of need, and felt a deep responsibility to return that kindness, even to a wild animal. The wolf's body shuddered with every small movement, and its low whimpers broke the oppressive silence. Rowan's eyes wandered over the tangled wire, its edges sharp and unyielding, and he felt a pang of anguish for the creature caught in this living nightmare. His mind raced as he weighed the risks. If he moved too abruptly, the wolf might panic and worsen its injury, or worse, attack him in a desperate act of self-defense. But if he hesitated too long, the cold and pain could claim the wolf's life for certain. Time slipped by slowly as Rowan's inner dialogue grew louder than the whistling wind. "I must help," he whispered to himself, his voice quivering, yet determined. "I cannot stand by and watch another soul suffer." In that moment, the memory of his own struggles, the times he had felt abandoned and in pain, lent him strength. He had experienced his share of loneliness and hardship, and now, standing on the edge of the frozen abyss, he knew he had the power to change the outcome for this magnificent creature. With a steadying exhale, Rowan reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small, weathered hunting knife. Its blade wasn't the most impressive, but it was familiar, an old tool that had seen him through many winters. As he held it in his gloved hand, he could feel its weight, not just in physical terms, but as a symbol of his commitment to act, despite the inherent dangers. Rowan's eyes met those of the wolf once more, and in that silent exchange, he found the courage he needed. He moved slowly, each deliberate step measured against the risk of startling the animal. The wind seemed to quiet around them, as if nature itself was holding its breath. His fingers trembled as he positioned the knife against the cold, metallic trap. Every second stretched into eternity as he carefully, almost reverently, began to work on freeing the wolf. The process was painstaking. Rowan had to gently pry the wire away from the wolf's leg without causing additional harm. The sound of metal straining against metal filled the air, merging with the soft, anguished sighs of the wolf. His heart pounded, and sweat mingled with the frost on his brow, each drop a testament to the struggle unfolding in the heart of the wilderness. Throughout this arduous process, the wolf never moved to attack. Instead, it seemed to understand that Rowan's intentions were not hostile. Its eyes, though pained, softened ever so slightly as if to acknowledge that help was at hand. That silent acknowledgement ignited in Rowan a deep, empathetic resolve. He knew that this was more than a rescue mission. It was an act of mercy that transcended the natural order of predator and prey. In that moment, he was not just a man in a harsh winter landscape. He was a guardian, a beacon of hope for a creature that had been abandoned by the cruelty of the world. The wire finally gave way with a harsh snap, and Rowan watched with a mix of relief and sorrow as the wolf collapsed into the snow, too weak to stand. Blood trickled from the wound, and for a brief moment, Rowan felt the weight of every decision he had made. He knelt down and gently cradled the trembling animal in his arms. "I'm here for you," he murmured softly, his voice carrying both warmth and regret. In that quiet, raw moment, the burden of his choice became clear. He had risked his own safety to save this creature, and now the responsibility of its fate rested entirely on his shoulders. Rowan's mind was a whirl of conflicting emotions. He could almost hear the echoes of voices from his past, friends, family, mentors, asking him if he was making the right decision. Yet, in the silence of the winter forest, there was no room for doubt. The wolf's trust, however fragile, was a gift he could not ignore. With trembling hands, he carefully removed his coat and wrapped it around the wounded animal, providing a meager barrier against the cold. Every movement was laden with the knowledge that the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, not just for the wolf, but for him as well. As he lifted the wolf, his muscles burned and his breath came in ragged puffs, Rowan was acutely aware of the weight of his choice. The wilderness, with all its beauty and brutality, had presented him with a stark moral dilemma: to act out of compassion, risking everything, or to walk away and let nature take its unforgiving course. In choosing the former, he had set in motion a chain of events that would forever alter both their lives. The decision was heavy on his heart, a blend of hope, despair, and unwavering determination. The journey back to his cabin was a blur of snow, wind, and silent contemplation. Each step was a reminder of the fragile bond that had been forged in that moment of rescue. Rowan's thoughts drifted between the immediate task of keeping the wolf alive and the broader implications of his actions. He wondered what the wolf's future held. Would it ever fully recover its strength? Could it return to the wild and reclaim the freedom that had been so cruelly taken from it? Or would it forever remain tethered to the memory of that cold, dark night? Despite the physical strain and the biting cold, Rowan's spirit was buoyed by the knowledge that his choice was an act of love. The simple act of reaching out, of defying the indifferent cruelty of the world, had awakened something in him that he feared was lost. Hope. The hope that even in the bleakest moments, compassion could triumph over despair, and that the smallest act of kindness could set in motion a ripple of change that would echo far beyond the confines of the frozen forest. As he trudged through the icy landscape, Rowan's mind replayed the scene over and over: the wolf's desperate, pleading eyes, the sound of the snapping wire, and the overwhelming silence that followed. It was a moment that crystallized the essence of his choice, a moment when he stepped into the unknown, driven by nothing but an inner call to help. Each gust of wind, each crunch of snow underfoot, was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of empathy. When at last Rowan reached his cabin, the early light of dawn had begun to break through the gray skies. The modest structure offered a sanctuary of warmth against the harshness outside. Inside, Rowan laid the wolf gently on a worn blanket near the flickering fireplace, and for a brief, poignant moment, he allowed himself to simply exist with the creature he had saved. It was a moment of stillness, a quiet interlude where the weight of his decision and the promise of new beginnings intertwined. Sitting by the fire, Rowan reflected on the enormity of what he had done. His choice had not been made lightly. It was a decision born of years of hardship, of watching the world turn its back on the vulnerable. In the wolf's silent gaze, he saw not only suffering but also an invitation, a chance to believe that even in a world marred by cruelty, there was a place for hope and healing. The act of saving the wolf had become a turning point in his own life, a moment that challenged him to rise above his own limitations and to embrace a future defined by compassion rather than despair. In the quiet that followed, as the sun's rays gradually warmed the room, Rowan knew that the true challenge was just beginning. The decision to save the wolf was only the first step on a long journey, a journey that would test his strength, his resolve, and his ability to change the course of fate for a creature so deeply wounded by the world. But in that silent moment, with the wolf resting peacefully near the hearth, Rowan felt a powerful certainty. He had chosen the path of compassion, and that choice, no matter how difficult, would light the way forward. For in every trial that life presented, there existed a possibility for redemption. And as the fire crackled and the first birds began to sing outside, Rowan's heart was filled with a quiet, steadfast determination. He resolved to do everything in his power to nurse the wolf back to health, and in doing so, to reclaim a part of himself that had long been lost in the shadows of a harsh world. This was the weight of his choice, a choice that bridged the gap between fear and love, between survival and the profound need to care. It was a burden he would carry with both sorrow and hope, knowing that every act of kindness was a step toward a brighter future, not just for the wolf, but for all souls lost in the relentless storm of life. And as he sat in that humble cabin, the echoes of that fateful moment reverberated in his mind, a constant reminder that in the midst of life's cruel uncertainties, compassion remained the most powerful force of all. Rowan gritted his teeth as the blizzard howled louder, turning the already perilous forest path into a merciless, white abyss. The storm bore down on him, snow stinging his face like tiny daggers, but he didn't falter. In his arms, cradled close to his chest, lay the wounded wolf, limp, trembling, and barely conscious. Wrapped in Rowan's coat, the wolf's weight felt heavier with each step, not just in body, but in responsibility. Rowan wasn't just carrying a creature through the snow. He was carrying a fragile life, balanced between death and the faintest hope of survival. The snowdrifts were deep, rising past his thighs. Each footstep took enormous effort. His boots sank into the soft snow and stuck, forcing him to wrench them free again and again. The cold was relentless, creeping through every seam of his clothes despite his layers. The wind roared through the trees, and the sky above had turned a bruised shade of gray, signaling that the storm was far from over. Still, Rowan pressed on. He didn't dare stop. Not for rest, not for warmth. His cabin lay nearly a mile away, and if he paused, even for a few minutes, the cold could take them both. The wolf let out a weak, whimpering sound, so soft it barely rose above the wind. Rowan glanced down, his heart clenching. The animal's eyelids fluttered, its breathing shallow and rapid. There was no turning back. "Just hold on, buddy," Rowan muttered through chattering teeth. "We're almost there." He wasn't sure if the words were for the wolf or for himself. As he trudged forward, memories began to rise unbidden of other treks through snow, of other storms. Years ago, he had been caught in a winter like this one with his younger brother, Elijah. They'd gone out for firewood and gotten separated in a sudden squall. Elijah had been just 16, stubborn and brave. Rowan remembered the panic, the shouting into the wind, the prayers whispered into the empty night. Elijah hadn't made it back. The image of his brother's face, pale and cold, found days later under a drift of snow, haunted Rowan to this day. And now, Carrying this half-dead wolf in his arms, Rowan felt like he was walking that same path again. But this time, he wouldn't lose what he was trying to protect. Not again. Not this time. Rowan forced his legs to keep moving. The landscape around him blurred into swirls of white and dark tree trunks. His fingers, numb and stiff, tightened around the bundle in his arms. He couldn't feel the wolf's heartbeat, but he told himself it was still there. It had to be. After what felt like an eternity, a faint orange glow appeared through the storm, the cabin's window. Relief surged through him like a fire. He almost cried. Stumbling now, feet dragging, he crossed the final few yards. Snow had piled against the door, and he used his shoulder to shove it open. A blast of warmth met him, smoke-scented air from the last dying embers of the fire he had built that morning. He dropped to his knees inside, the door slamming shut behind him. The sudden stillness was deafening. Inside the cabin, the only sounds were his gasping breath and the soft whine from the wolf. Rowan gently set the animal down onto a folded blanket near the hearth and rushed to stoke the fire. His hands fumbled with the logs, but soon flames crackled to life, casting golden light over the room. The wolf didn't move. For a second, Rowan thought he was too late. He crouched down beside the animal, placing a trembling hand on its side. A shallow rise and fall. Still breathing. Rowan exhaled in shaky relief and quickly stripped off his snow-soaked coat and gloves. He retrieved clean cloths and a small bowl from the shelf, melting snow over the fire to get warm water. With careful hands, he began cleaning the wolf's wound. The wire had done more damage than he'd realized. Raw flesh, angry red with infection, surrounded the gash in its leg. The animal whimpered but didn't resist. "You're tough," Rowan murmured. "That's good. We're going to need that fight in you." He bandaged the wound with what little he had in his rudimentary first aid kit. Then he removed a strip of jerky from his bag, softened it in hot water, and offered it to the wolf. It didn't eat, but sniffed weakly at the broth-soaked meat. Its eyes were glazed, unfocused. As night fell, the storm outside grew worse. The wind slammed against the cabin walls, and the forest beyond groaned under the weight of the snow. But inside, there was warmth, light, and a sense, however fragile, of safety. Rowan sat back in a wooden chair, exhaustion washing over him in waves. His muscles screamed in pain, and his face was raw from windburn. But all he could look at was the wolf, the wild creature now lying in his home, vulnerable, defenseless. There was something surreal about it all. He had grown up fearing wolves. Tales passed down through generations painted them as monsters, thieves of livestock, stalkers of the night. But this one, this injured soul, had changed something in him. It hadn't bitten or snarled or fought. It had allowed him to help. Had looked him in the eyes, not with hatred, but something else. Trust? That thought filled Rowan with a strange emotion, a mixture of pride and sorrow. Later that night, as the fire dimmed and the storm raged outside, Rowan covered the wolf with a second blanket and whispered, "I don't know why I did it. Maybe I'm just tired of letting things die. Maybe I'm tired of being alone." The wolf didn't answer, of course, but in the quiet warmth of the cabin, something shifted. Not just the fate of the animal, but Rowan's too. Something had begun to heal, and as sleep pulled him into its depths, Rowan made a silent promise to himself and to the silent creature beside him. No matter how hard it got, he would not give up on this wolf. He would not let this one die. Not like Elijah. Not again. Not this time. The wind shrieked like a living beast, swirling snow into maddening spirals that swallowed up all sound and sight. Trees creaked and groaned, their frozen branches bending in protest. In the heart of this icy wilderness trudged a solitary man, Rowan, fighting both the elements and time itself. Cradled in his arms was a creature few dared approach even under calm skies, a wolf, injured and near death. Its body was limp, barely stirring beneath the makeshift sling of Rowan's heavy coat. Blood had soaked through the fabric, dark and ominous, and the animal's breathing had grown so faint it barely moved its chest. Yet Rowan clung to the belief that it could still survive. It had to. Snow lashed his face, numbing his cheeks and brow, but Rowan dared not stop. The storm was building, fury rising by the minute. With each step, he sank deeper into the snowdrifts. His boots were soaked, his legs burned, his breath came in ragged bursts that turned to frost on his beard. But still, he walked. Behind him, his footprints were already disappearing, claimed by the relentless blizzard. Ahead of him was his only hope, the faint, flickering idea of shelter, a cabin, a fire, a chance. Rowan's mind drifted, dangerously, unconsciously, to old memories, to warmer times, to laughter shared around a fire with his younger brother, Elijah, who had died in a winter just like this one. It had been Rowan's fault. He had told Elijah to split off, to gather more kindling while Rowan searched the ridge, a decision he'd regretted every day since. The search party had found Elijah 3 days later, curled in a drift, frost-bitten fingers still clenched around a small bundle of twigs. His eyes had been open, empty, lost to the cold. Rowan had not allowed himself to feel anything for a long time after that. And now, this wolf, another soul in his arms, another life fading with every heartbeat. Was this redemption? He didn't know, but he would not make the same mistake again. The storm shrieked louder, as if mocking him. "Not today," he growled under his breath. "You're not taking another one from me." Finally, through the curtain of snow, he saw it, a faint golden flicker, a window, his cabin. Relief hit him like a wave, and his knees buckled. He stumbled, falling to one knee, the wolf lurching in his arms. Gasping, Rowan pushed himself upright. He couldn't fall now. He had made it. He reached the door, shoved it open with his shoulder, and staggered inside. Warmth, thick, musty, and scented with wood smoke, wrapped around him like a blanket. The door slammed shut behind him, sealing out the blizzard's roar. Inside, the world was still. Rowan collapsed to the wooden floor, gently placing the wolf on a folded blanket near the hearth. Its eyes fluttered. Barely open, barely conscious. "Stay with me," he whispered, brushing ice from the wolf's fur. "Don't you quit now." The fire had dwindled to embers, but Rowan worked quickly. He tossed on fresh logs, coaxing the flames back to life. Soon, warmth began to fill the room. The flickering firelight danced across the wolf's body, gray fur matted with blood and snow, limbs trembling, breath shallow. Rowan stripped off his soaked jacket and shirt, revealing arms scarred from years of frontier living. He moved with purpose, retrieving his first aid kit, a bowl, rags, and a kettle. He melted snow over the fire, preparing warm water to clean the wound. He knelt beside the wolf and studied the injury. The wire trap had done more damage than he'd feared. The leg was swollen, and deep cuts were visible through torn fur. The infection had already begun to set in. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "This is going to hurt." As gently as he could, he cleaned the wound, dabbing warm water over the flesh, wiping away dried blood and ice. The wolf whimpered, a soft, wounded sound, but didn't lash out. Its eyes opened slightly, golden and glassy, but focused for just a moment on Rowan's face. He saw something there. Recognition? Trust? He didn't know. But it stirred something inside him he hadn't felt in a long time. When the wound was clean, Rowan tore strips from an old undershirt to wrap it. He fashioned a crude brace from splints and secured it with twine. Then he offered the wolf a bowl of warm broth made from crushed jerky and water. The animal sniffed it weakly, then turned its head away. "No appetite," Rowan muttered. "But you're still breathing." He sat back against the wall, the fire crackling. The storm raged outside, wind whistling through the cracks in the windows, but inside the cabin, there was peace. Rowan watched the wolf sleep, chest rising and falling slowly. He should have felt afraid. This was a predator, after all. Wild, untamed, dangerous, but he didn't. He felt connected, as though fate had brought them together for a reason. He looked around the room. It was sparse, wooden shelves stacked with tools, an old rifle above the door, a worn table, 2 chairs, and a bed in the corner. It had been enough for him, enough for a man who had chosen to live alone, away from people, away from pain. But maybe not enough anymore. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a small, weathered photo. Elijah grinning wide, arms slung over Rowan's shoulder. Behind them the forest, green and alive. That was before the cold had taken him, before Rowan had built walls around his heart, just like the ones around this cabin. He looked back at the wolf. "Maybe it's not too late," he whispered. "Maybe there's still something worth saving. In both of us." The hours passed slowly. Rowan stayed awake, checking the wolf's bandage, stoking the fire, listening to the storm. At one point, the wolf stirred, shifted its weight, and let out a soft, uncertain growl. Rowan didn't flinch. "It's okay," he said gently. "I'm not going to hurt you." The wolf's ears flicked. Its eyes met his again. Something was changing. By dawn, the storm had passed. Pale light seeped through the frost-covered windows. Rowan rose stiffly and opened the door just a crack. The world outside was blanketed in white, the trees heavy with snow. Silence reigned. He closed the door and turned back to the wolf, who now lifted its head slightly. It sniffed the air, looked toward the fire, and made a faint, almost questioning noise. Rowan knelt beside it again, offering more broth. This time, the wolf licked at the edge of the bowl. He smiled. "That's it. You're still fighting." For the first time in a long while, Rowan felt something warm rise in his chest. Hope. He tended to the fire, then sat nearby, watching the wolf rest. In the quiet morning, with light returning to the world, something new had begun. A connection, a silent bond between man and beast. Both scarred, both survivors, both learning how to trust again. And as the day slowly brightened, Rowan made another silent vow. He would do whatever it took to save this creature, not just because it needed him, but because, in some deep, unspoken way, he needed it too. The cabin had never felt this alive. It wasn't the fire, though it now crackled with a steady rhythm, spreading warmth to the furthest corners of the room. Nor was it the food simmering quietly on the small stove. It was something else, something Rowan couldn't quite explain. The presence of the wolf, resting just a few feet from him, brought a strange energy to the space. Uncertainty, tension, but also meaning. It had been 2 days since the storm. The wolf had survived the first night, barely. Fever had come, then tremors. Rowan had hardly slept, sitting cross-legged by the fire, sponge in hand, dabbing cold water on the animal's ears and pads. He had murmured nonsense, like a parent soothing a child through nightmares. "You're safe now. Hang in there. Just keep breathing." He didn't even know if the wolf could understand him. But somehow, talking helped. By morning, the fever broke, and when the wolf opened its eyes again, more alert, less glassy, Rowan felt something shift, as if the wild creature before him had decided, for reasons known only to instinct, not to die. Still, the peace between them was thin as ice. Rowan had no illusions. This was a predator. A wounded one, sure, but still dangerous. Its instincts ran deeper than memory. Even now, the wolf's eyes followed his every movement. When Rowan stood, it tensed. When he approached, it growled low, uncertain whether to trust or fear. And yet, it hadn't tried to flee. It hadn't lashed out. It had accepted water, and later, a few shreds of softened meat. There was something fragile here. Not trust, but the beginning of it. On the third morning, Rowan awoke to find the wolf not only awake, but upright, its weight awkwardly balanced on 3 good legs. It was sniffing the air, its nose twitching toward the half-open window. Rowan froze. The animal hadn't noticed him yet. He stayed motionless in his chair, watching. The sunlight caught the wolf's fur, no longer crusted in blood and frost, but clean, silver gray, and thick. Its ribs were still visible, but less pronounced. The leg was still braced, still raw, but healing. The wolf turned, and its eyes met Rowan's, and, for a heartbeat, something unspoken passed between them. Recognition. A silent, "I see you." Then the moment shattered. The wolf's hackles raised. It growled. Rowan lifted his hands slowly. "Easy," he said, voice calm. "Just me." The growl continued for a moment, then faded. The wolf sat back down, panting slightly. Exhaustion had returned. Rowan exhaled. That had been close. He moved quietly to the stove and ladled warm broth into a bowl. He set it down a few feet from the wolf, backing away without turning his back. The wolf eyed the offering warily, but eventually limped forward and drank. That was the first time Rowan dared to hope they might coexist. By the end of the week, the cabin had adjusted to its strange new dynamic. Rowan had made a partition, half wall, half crate, between the hearth and the rest of the cabin, giving the wolf its space. The animal rarely left it, though its ears perked up whenever Rowan moved about, chopping firewood or preparing meals. Sometimes Rowan caught it watching him, head tilted slightly. Curious. Other times, it slept deeply, dreaming of things Rowan could only guess. Forests, hunts, freedom. Rowan had started talking to it more, not expecting answers, just filling the silence. "Name's Rowan, by the way. You probably don't care." The wolf blinked. "I used to have a dog. Long time ago, before I moved out here. Her name was Juniper. She was a mutt, smart as hell, knew how to open the fridge, stole a whole chicken once." The wolf yawned. Rowan smiled to himself. "Right, not impressed." He glanced at the half-healed leg, now cleaner, less inflamed. "Still got a long way to go, but you're tougher than you look." There was a pause. Then Rowan added softly, "I guess we both are." On the 10th day, something remarkable happened. Rowan was outside, chopping wood in the gray morning light. Snowflakes drifted lazily down, but the storm had passed, and the cold had mellowed into something survivable. He stacked the logs in silence, the thud of each one echoing into the trees. When he turned to go inside, he stopped dead. The wolf was standing in the doorway, not fully, just its head and shoulders, but it was there, watching him. Rowan stood still. The axe dangled at his side, forgotten. The wolf sniffed the air, then looked at him, not with fear or challenge, but with quiet curiosity, as if wondering who this man really was. What kind of creature would rescue a predator, carry it through a blizzard, and then feed it by hand? Rowan didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched, and after a moment, the wolf stepped back inside. That night, Rowan left the partition open. By the second week, The wolf's progress was undeniable. It walked on its injured leg now, limping but determined. It ate more, rested less. Its coat had regained some sheen, and though Rowan still treated it with caution, he no longer feared it. In fact, he looked forward to their quiet routine. There was something healing about their shared silences. The way the wolf lay curled near the fire while Rowan read a battered book, the way it raised its head when he coughed, or how it paced restlessly when a storm rolled in. It reminded Rowan he wasn't alone. That realization scared him more than he cared to admit, because he liked it, and that meant he could lose it. One night, Rowan stood at the window, staring out at the moonlit trees. The forest was quiet, too quiet. He hadn't seen another human in weeks. But somewhere out there, traps still waited, poachers still hunted, wolves like this one still suffered. He looked back at the sleeping creature, curled into the blanket like a child. He couldn't let it go. Not yet. Not into a world like that. On the 15th day, the wolf surprised him again. Rowan was outside collecting kindling when he heard a sharp bark behind him. He turned and saw the wolf limping down the porch steps. "Whoa, hey," Rowan said, hurrying forward. Wolf had healed enough to walk with barely a limp now, his coat full and glossy again, but he still bore the scar around his leg, a jagged reminder of human cruelty and nature's unfairness. "You're not coming with me," Rowan said, crouching beside him. The wolf tilted his head. "This isn't a hike. It's not safe." Rusty leaned forward, pressed his head briefly against Rowan's shoulder, then stepped back. The gesture made Rowan's throat tighten. "I'll be back," he said softly. He didn't believe it entirely. The trek to the first site took hours. Rowan moved fast, conserving his energy, keeping to the tree line where the snow was thinner. He wore his thickest coat, carried a rifle slung across his back, though he hoped not to use it, and a pack stuffed with gear, wire cutters, a camera, a small notebook, 2 protein bars, and a water flask already half frozen. By noon, he reached a ridge overlooking a wide clearing. Below, nestled in a dip between frozen bushes, was a trap. Fresh. Its wire gleamed like ice. No snow had gathered on it, no tracks disturbed the dusting around it. Rowan crouched, heart thudding. He slid the camera from his pack, zoomed in, and clicked a photo. Then, another. Then, he slowly descended. Closer now, he could see the cruelty of the snare, how it was designed to tighten with every movement. It wasn't some amateur's trap. This had been made with precision, experience, and worse, intention. He knelt beside it and snipped the wire clean. One down. He reset the snow with his gloved hands, masking his tracks, then moved on. By dusk, Rowan had located 3 more traps. One had blood on it. He didn't know if it belonged to a rabbit, a fox, or something larger, but it turned his stomach. He took pictures of all of them, and in one place, found faint boot prints leading away into the trees. He followed them for nearly a mile before the Sainchim vanished in a rocky patch. Still, it was something. The light began to fade and cold crept into his bones. It was time to make camp. Rowan picked a sheltered hollow beneath an overhang of rock. He dug into the snow, cleared a spot for his small fire, and used flint to strike a spark. The flame flickered weakly, then caught. He sat close to it, cupping his hands around the warmth. The forest around him remained unnaturally quiet. No owls, no wolves, not even the rustle of wind. He thought about Rusty. Was he pacing the porch, waiting, or curled up in front of the fire, wondering if Rowan had broken his promise? Rowan stared into the flame. He hadn't broken it. Not yet. At dawn, he pressed deeper into the ridge. The snow was rougher here, churned up by something, or someone. He saw signs of an ATV, faint but unmistakable, and followed the trail until he reached a grove that made his blood run cold. There were 4 traps, set in a tight circle, hidden beneath pine boughs, and in the center was a deer, a young one, dead, stiff with cold. It had bled out. Slowly. Rowan dropped to one knee, mouth dry. He snapped a photo, then moved to dismantle the traps, hands trembling with rage. This wasn't hunting. This was sadism. He'd known this mission would be hard, but he hadn't expected the ache in his chest to be this heavy. The poachers weren't just collecting animals. They were using them. That evening, as he trudged back toward a logging path, Rowan heard something that made him freeze. Voices, male, distant. He crouched low behind a snow-laden bush and peered through the branches. 2 men were talking near a tree marked with orange tape. One held a coil of wire, the other carried a rifle. Rowan couldn't make out their words, but their posture was relaxed, too relaxed for hikers. They were setting another trap. His blood surged. Silently, he lifted the camera, zoomed in, and began snapping photos. He counted everything: tools, equipment, faces. Then, a branch snapped beneath his boot. A sharp crack. The men turned instantly. "Did you hear that?" one said. Rowan didn't wait. He turned and ran, silent, swift, dodging between trees like a shadow. A shout rang out behind him, then the unmistakable sound of pursuit. The next 10 minutes were a blur of branches whipping his face, boots crunching snow, lungs burning from the cold. Rowan veered off the path, angling downhill toward a dry creek bed. Shots rang out. Wolf had healed enough to walk with barely a limp now, his coat full and glossy again, but he still bore the scar around his leg, a jagged reminder of human cruelty and nature's unfairness. "You're not coming with me," Rowan said, crouching beside him. The wolf tilted his head. "This isn't a hike. It's not safe." Rusty leaned forward, pressed his head briefly against Rowan's shoulder, then stepped back. The gesture made Rowan's throat tighten. "I'll be back," he said softly. He didn't believe it entirely. The trek to the first site took hours. Rowan moved fast, conserving his energy, keeping to the tree line where the snow was thinner. He wore his thickest coat, carried a rifle slung across his back, though he hoped not to use it, and a pack stuffed with gear: wire cutters, a camera, a small notebook, 2 protein bars, and a water flask already half frozen. By noon, he reached a ridge overlooking a wide clearing. Below, nestled in a dip between frozen bushes, was a trap. Fresh. Its wire gleamed like ice. No snow had gathered on it, no tracks disturbed the dusting around it. Rowan crouched, heart thudding. He slid the camera from his pack, zoomed in, and clicked a photo. Then, another. Then, he slowly descended. Closer now, he could see the cruelty of the snare, how it was designed to tighten with every movement. It wasn't some amateur's trap. This had been made with precision, experience, and worse, intention. He knelt beside it and snipped the wire clean. One down. He reset the snow with his gloved hands, masking his tracks, then moved on. By dusk, Rowan had located 3 more traps. One had blood on it. He didn't know if it belonged to a rabbit, a fox, or something larger, but it turned his stomach. He took pictures of all of them, and in one place, found faint boot prints leading away into the trees. He followed them for nearly a mile before the Saincham vanished in a rocky patch. Still, it was something. The light began to fade and cold crept into his bones. It was time to make camp. Rowan picked a sheltered hollow beneath an overhang of rock. He dug into the snow, cleared a spot for his small fire, and used flint to strike a spark. The flame flickered weakly, then caught. He sat close to it, cupping his hands around the warmth. The forest around him remained unnaturally quiet. No owls, no wolves, not even the rustle of wind. He thought about Rusty. Was he pacing the porch, waiting, or curled up in front of the fire, wondering if Rowan had broken his promise? Rowan stared into the flame. He hadn't broken it. Not yet. At dawn, he pressed deeper into the ridge. The snow was rougher here, churned up by something, or someone. He saw signs of an ATV, faint but unmistakable, and followed the trail until he reached a grove that made his blood run cold. There were 4 traps, set in a tight circle, hidden beneath pine boughs, and in the center was a deer, a young one, dead, stiff with cold. It had bled out. Slowly. Rowan dropped to one knee, mouth dry. He snapped a photo, then moved to dismantle the traps, hands trembling with rage. This wasn't hunting. This was sadism. He'd known this mission would be hard, but he hadn't expected the ache in his chest to be this heavy. The poachers weren't just collecting animals. They were using them. That evening, as he trudged back toward a logging path, Rowan heard something that made him freeze. Voices, male, distant. He crouched low behind a snow-laden bush and peered through the branches. 2 men were talking near a tree marked with orange tape. One held a coil of wire, the other carried a rifle. Rowan couldn't make out their words, but their posture was relaxed, too relaxed for hikers. They were setting another trap. His blood surged. Silently, he lifted the camera, zoomed in, and began snapping photos. He counted everything: tools, equipment, faces. Then, a branch snapped beneath his boot. A sharp crack. The men turned instantly. "Did you hear that?" one said. Rowan didn't wait. He turned and ran, silent, swift, dodging between trees like a shadow. A shout rang out behind him, then the unmistakable sound of pursuit. The next 10 minutes were a blur of branches whipping his face, boots crunching snow, lungs burning from the cold. Rowan veered off the path, angling downhill toward a dry creek bed. Shots rang out, not close, but not far either. They were trying to scare him, maybe worse. He flung himself over a fallen log and scrambled into the gully, heart hammering like a drum. He slid behind a boulder, panting. His gloves were soaked, his coat ripped. He waited. Minutes passed. Silence. Then footsteps. Receding. They'd given up. For now. That night, Rowan didn't make a fire. He didn't sleep. He sat in the dark, clutching the camera to his chest, knowing what he carried was more than evidence now. It was proof. Proof of cruelty, of organized poaching, of men who didn't care who or what got in their way. And they had seen his face. By the time Rowan reached his cabin 2 days later, he was limping. Rusty met him halfway down the trail, trotting with alarm, ears flattened, tail stiff. Rowan dropped to one knee and let the wolf press against him, warmth radiating from its thick fur. "I'm okay," Rowan whispered, eyes stinging. "I made it back." Inside, he stripped off his boots, peeled away his coat, and placed the camera on the table like it was sacred. Then he picked up the radio. "Sensen," he said, voice raw. "I've got what you need." The room was silent, except for the low crackling of the fire and the soft clicks of the memory card being removed from Rowan's camera. Sensen stood at the table, his thick ranger's jacket still dusted with snow, brows furrowed as he leaned forward to examine the photos on Rowan's old laptop. Rowan sat nearby, cradling a mug of lukewarm coffee in bruised, frozen hands. His fingers still throbbed from the days in the wilderness. The scrape along his temple had scabbed over, and the swelling in his ankle was slowly going down, but none of that mattered now. Not when the screen displayed the face of a man with a rifle, standing beside a dead deer in a circle of snares. "That's him," Sensen muttered. "Marcus Doyle, ex-logger. He's been on our radar before, always too careful to catch in the act." "Not careful enough this time," Rowan said hoarsely. Sensen clicked to the next photo. Rows of hidden traps, a spool of wire, tire tracks from an ATV, the orange marking tape fluttering from a branch like a warning flag. Then, the next image, a blurry close-up of the second man, younger, lanky, holding something metallic and sharp in his gloved hand. Sensen exhaled deeply. "This is enough to make a move," he said, "but not enough to make it stick. We need more. Names, locations, evidence of trade." Rowan's heart sank. "You mean I have to go back?" "No," Sensen said. "Not this time. We're bringing more people in." By the next afternoon, Rowan's cabin, once a place of solitude, had become the unofficial headquarters of a quiet war. Miss Hawkins arrived first, her parka zipped to the chin and her nose red from the cold. The freelance journalist had been following rumors of poaching for months, but never had such damning images to work with. "These," she whispered, pointing to the camera feed Rowan had transferred to his laptop, "are gold. No one can dismiss this as rumor anymore. Not the public, not the Forest Commission, not even the state." Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with fire. Then came Dr. Braxton, exhausted from long shifts at the clinic but carrying boxes of medical supplies and notes. She brought veterinary photos, images of wounds consistent with wire snares, infections left untreated, wolves with shredded paws and necrotic tissue. "This is what they don't see," she said to Hawkins, laying down the images one by one. "The aftermath. These animals suffer, quietly, out of sight." Rowan, standing off to the side with Rusty curled at his feet, felt the familiar sting behind his eyes. These were no longer just traps in the woods. They were stories, scars, evidence. By the end of the week, the team had grown to 6, 2 retired rangers, a wildlife photographer from the next valley, and even Lily, the teenage neighbor who'd named Rusty, joined in, offering to sort files, transcribe witness notes, and contact volunteers. The table in Rowan's cabin was now a patchwork of maps, photos, printed articles, and scribbled notes. Hawkins paced back and forth, laptop in hand. "I can go public with this. I've got a platform. The Wolves of Winter piece went viral last year, but if I publish too soon, we risk spooking them. They'll scatter. Burn evidence. Go underground." Rowan nodded. "So what's the plan?" "We build a case so strong," Sensen said from the corner, "that even if they run, the net catches them anyway." Rowan never thought he'd become an activist. He'd always been a man of quiet resistance, doing right without fanfare, helping when no one looked. But now he found himself speaking on calls with officials, emailing wildlife organizations, explaining to strangers what snares looked like, how traps were baited, where to look for signs. Every night he returned to the fire, emotionally drained.
Rusty sensed it. The wolf never strayed far, sometimes sitting by Rowan's side, sometimes watching him from the corner with that calm, golden stare that said more than words could. One night, after hours of note-taking and map-marking, Rowan leaned back and looked at him. "We're doing it," he whispered. "We're fighting back." Rusty didn't blink. Then came the news they needed. A tip. Hawkins had received a message through an encrypted app, someone claiming to have worked with the poachers briefly, someone who wanted out. Someone with documents, photos, and receipts. Rowan's heart raced as he read the message. The informant was willing to meet. But only in person. Only at night. And only in a public place. 2 days later, Rowan and Hawkins met the man in the back corner of an old diner just off the highway. He was young, maybe early 20s, jumpy, with shaking hands and darting eyes. "I helped them fix their truck once," he muttered. "Didn't know what they were doing until later. But they paid well." Too well. I asked questions. They told me to shut up. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were handwritten notes. GPS coordinates. Names. A photo of a wolf pelt nailed to the side of a shed. Hawkins' hand flew to her mouth. Rowan's fingers curled around the paper. Why are you helping us? The man shrugged, eyes gleaming. My brother's dog got caught in one of their traps last fall. He nearly bled out. That was enough for me. With the folder, they had a breakthrough. The names matched police records, individuals with hunting violations, fines for trespassing, and connections to illegal game trades. One name belonged to the owner of a remote cabin known for trophy displays. Another to a taxidermist under quiet investigation. It all tied together. Rowan stared at the growing web of names and places on his wall like it was a map of a secret war. This isn't just poaching, he said to Hawkins. It's a business. And we just found the boardroom, she replied grimly. They submitted the report to the Forest Commission and State Wildlife Agency. Rowan expected bureaucracy. Delays. Shrugs. What he didn't expect was the response, urgency. Officials arrived at his cabin within 24 hours. They asked questions, examined evidence, took copies, and promised action. We've been waiting for something like this, said Agent Turner, a stern woman in a gray parka. There's pressure on us now. Public sentiment is shifting. Your work, it's more than just documentation. It's a reckoning. Rowan felt something swell in his chest. Not pride. Something softer. Hope. But the days that followed were filled with tension. What if the poachers caught wind? What if the informant was found out? What if Rusty's name, his story, became too well known, too easy to trace? Rowan wrestled with that last thought. He'd never planned to keep the wolf. He wasn't a pet. He belonged to the wild. But the idea of Rusty out there alone again. It haunted him. He sat on the porch one evening, watching the horizon melt into gold and gray. Rusty stepped beside him, sat down. You saved me, Rowan said softly. Now I'm trying to return the favor. To your kind. To what you represent. Rusty looked at him. Not as a pet. But as an equal. One night, Hawkins published the first article. The wire in the snow, inside the battle to save the wolves of the north. The photos were brutal. The story's heartbreaking. It went viral within hours. Messages flooded in, some from supporters, some from former trappers now ashamed, some threatening. But the world had seen. And it couldn't look away. The following morning, the crisp air outside Rowan's cabin seemed to carry a heavier silence than usual, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. The wolf, now dubbed Rusty by Lily, lay curled beside the fireplace. Its once weary body had gained a bit of strength, enough to lift its head when Rowan entered the room with a bowl of warm broth. Though the animal's eyes remained guarded, there was a softness now, a reluctant trust that had begun to take root. Rowan knelt beside Rusty and set the bowl down carefully. As the wolf sniffed the contents and began to lap at the broth, Rowan's mind was already occupied. The news from Ranger Sensen had changed everything. This wasn't just about one wolf anymore. It was about a network of cruelty that stretched through the forest like the very snares it left behind, hidden, silent, deadly. Rowan couldn't shake the image of the trap that had nearly severed Rusty's leg. How many others hadn't been as lucky? He looked out the frost-framed window toward the snow-covered expanse beyond. The thought of more animals suffering alone in the cold was unbearable. He had to act, but not alone. Later that day, Sensen arrived at the cabin, stomping the snow off his boots at the threshold. The ranger's rugged face was grim, a map tucked under one arm and a thermos of coffee in the other. They sat at the table, the map unfurled between them, littered with small red markings where traps had been found in recent months. It was worse than Rowan expected. "These snares, they're not haphazard," Sensen muttered, tracing one gloved finger along a marked path. "They're set in strategic locations, places wolves and deer are known to frequent. Someone knows the terrain. And they're organized." Rowan frowned. "How many people are we talking about?" "At least 3, maybe more. We've had sightings of a black pickup truck, out-of-state plates, never stays long in town. But no one's managed to get close." Rowan leaned back in his chair, jaw tight. "We need proof. Real, undeniable evidence." Sensen nodded. "Exactly. And that's where you come in." That evening, Lily dropped by with supplies and a fresh bundle of firewood. Her eyes lit up at the sight of Rusty standing, albeit shakily, on all fours. She knelt and whispered to him as though speaking to an old friend. "We were thinking of setting up cameras," Rowan explained to her, watching the two. "Hidden ones. If we can catch them in the act." "I can help," she said, standing. "I know the woods. My dad used to track deer trails all over that ridge near Pine Hollow. If they're laying snares, that's a likely spot." Rowan hesitated, protective instincts stirring. "It's dangerous, Lily." "I'm not asking to go alone," she said softly. "But this isn't just your fight anymore, Rowan. Rusty belongs to all of us now." That night, as Rowan stared into the fire with the wolf sleeping nearby, he made his decision. The next morning, armed with cameras, notebooks, and a burning resolve, Rowan, Sensen, and Lily began to survey the marked snare sites. Miss Hawkins, the journalist, joined them with her camera and unwavering curiosity. Rowan was wary of her at first, worried about what publicity could mean for Rusty, but her passion was undeniable. She had dedicated months to tracking illegal wildlife crimes and wanted to shed light on the growing issue. They spent days combing through snow-dusted brush, documenting broken traps, and setting up trail cameras disguised among branches. Each night, they regrouped at the cabin, sharing findings and cross-referencing notes. Rusty, now more alert, would sometimes sit by the window as if watching for their return. As the days passed, the forest seemed to whisper its secrets. Fresh footprints. Scraps of meat used as bait. Even an empty energy drink can, odd and out of place, left near one of the more remote snares. Slowly, the picture began to form. Then, one bitterly cold morning, the first footage came in. On the grainy camera feed, 2 figures trudged into frame. One knelt to check a trap, the other glanced around nervously. The image wasn't crystal clear, but it was enough: faces, movements, actions. Rowan's heart pounded as they watched. "We have them," Sensen said quietly. But they needed more. One image wouldn't shut the operation down. The team agreed to continue the stakeout, rotating shifts and camping out near the most active snare sites. Rowan, hardened by his years in the wild, volunteered for the coldest hours, between midnight and dawn. He sat wrapped in layers beneath a fallen pine, his camera trained on the trail ahead, Rusty's near-death experience replaying in his mind like a haunting echo. And then, one night, it happened. Crunch. Footsteps. Rowan froze, breath steaming in the frigid air. Through the darkness, 2 figures emerged again, this time closer, their conversation audible in snatches. "Check the next one by the ridge. Make sure no one's been here." Click. Rowan snapped the photos. Then more. His fingers were numb, but his mind was burning. When the figures left, Rowan crawled from his hiding place and examined the snare they'd touched. It was fresh. The trap still glistened with a drop of animal blood, another victim had suffered here. He returned to the cabin at dawn, drained and shivering. But when he entered and saw Rusty rise slightly, tail twitching, something inside him warmed. They were closer now. The forest had spoken, and Rowan had listened. They would not stop until the last snare was broken. The wind howled outside like a beast denied. Snow battered the windows in relentless sheets, draping the forest in a suffocating blanket of white. Rowan sat beside the fireplace, the warmth doing little to comfort the storm within him. Across the room, the wolf, Rusty, as Lily had named him, lay curled on a woven rug, his yellow eyes half closed but ever alert. Rowan had grown used to the animal's silent presence, the way it breathed as if measuring the room, aware of everything, even in pain. The events of the past weeks had transformed Rowan. He wasn't the same man who had set out to gather firewood and found a wounded predator instead. He had fought against bitter cold, harsh terrain, and even harsher choices. Now, with the evidence they had gathered, the moment for confrontation had finally arrived. The stakeout operation had yielded photographs, clear ones, of the poachers. Faces. License plates. The traps they were setting. Miss Hawkins had already published a short exposé on a regional news blog, and it had gone viral in their small community. But for the authorities to act decisively, they needed an airtight case. That meant not only catching the poachers in the act but ensuring no loose ends could unravel the effort. That night, Rowan and Ranger Sensen met inside a ranger outpost that stood miles away from any real road. It was a small wooden structure with peeling paint and a sputtering heater, but it had served as headquarters for several search and rescue operations over the years. This time, it would serve as the launch point for something more covert, and more dangerous. "Tonight's the best chance we'll get," Sensen said, spreading out a map of the forest. His finger tapped a location circled in red. "They've been checking this site every 3 days. They'll come tonight." Rowan nodded. "Same time. Midnight. We need to be in position by 11. No mistakes." Miss Hawkins stood nearby, wrapping a scarf around her neck, her camera already loaded with fresh batteries and memory cards. She had the determined look of someone who had seen cruelty and vowed to end it with her lens. "Are we certain they won't notice us this time?" she asked. "We'll be wearing snow camo," Sensen replied, pulling out gear from a large duffel bag. "And we've repositioned our trail cams higher up in the trees. They won't see them unless they're looking straight up." Lily insisted on joining them, despite protests. She was young, but her spirit was indomitable. And Rusty had taken a liking to her, something Rowan found oddly reassuring. She didn't talk much that evening. She didn't need to. The way she looked at Rowan, at Sensen, and at the gear being prepared, said everything. It's time. By 10:30 p.m., they were on their way. The forest was silent in that eerie, expectant way. Even the trees seemed to be holding their breath. The group moved in single file, snow crunching faintly underfoot, every sound muffled by the thick snow. Sensen led, armed with a tranquilizer rifle, just in case. Rowan carried a small pack with medical supplies, a flare, a walkie-talkie, and gloves. Miss Hawkins trailed behind them, her camera slung across her chest and a backup recorder on her belt. Lily walked beside her father, eyes scanning the darkness ahead. It took them 40 minutes to reach the location, a small clearing marked by a fallen tree and a half-frozen stream. The team split up and took their positions around the perimeter. Hidden beneath white sheets of camouflage, they waited. The minutes dragged by. Every gust of wind sounded like a whisper. Every crack of branches, a warning. Then, movement. At precisely 12:14 a.m., 2 figures emerged from the northern path. They were dressed in heavy parkas and ski masks, their breath puffing visibly into the frigid night. One of them carried a burlap sack. The other, a coil of wire. Rowan's heart pounded as he watched them approach the clearing. They spoke in hushed tones, occasionally pausing to glance over their shoulders. One of them knelt beside a tree and began setting a snare. Miss Hawkins's camera clicked, once, twice, thrice, each frame freezing the crime in high resolution. Senson's voice crackled faintly in Rowan's earpiece. Wait for it. Let them finish. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. The poachers completed their setup, placing 3 snares, baiting one with raw meat. The man with the sack opened it, revealing something that made Rowan's blood boil, a wolf pelt. Fresh. Untanned. That was all the confirmation they needed. Senson emerged from the shadows like a ghost, gun raised. Hands up. Drop the wire. The poachers froze. Then, chaos. One turned and bolted. The other pulled a knife and lunged at Senson. Rowan was already moving. He sprinted from behind the tree and tackled the attacker, sending both of them crashing into the snow. The knife skittered away. Lily shouted, "Dad! Stay back!" Rowan barked, wrestling the man down. The poacher thrashed, kicking and screaming, but Rowan managed to pin him until Senson arrived to help restrain him. The second man didn't get far. Miss Hawkins had radioed in his direction, and within minutes, backup arrived from another outpost. By 1:30 a.m., both poachers were in custody. The traps were dismantled. The evidence was secure. And yet, something still felt unfinished. Back at the cabin, Rowan found himself standing in the doorway, watching the wolf sleep. Rusty stirred as Rowan entered. The wolf's ears perked, and its head lifted, meeting Rowan's eyes. "You were the beginning," Rowan murmured, kneeling beside him. "This whole thing, every risk, every mile walked through snow, every photo snapped. It all started with you." He reached out, gently resting his hand near the wolf's paw. Rusty didn't flinch. He didn't growl. He leaned forward, just slightly, pressing his nose against Rowan's knuckles. That small gesture, simple yet powerful, broke something inside Rowan. All the exhaustion, the fear, the weight of weeks spent pushing against the dark, it came out in silent tears that rolled down his cheeks and vanished into his beard. He stayed like that for a long time. The next few days moved fast. The poachers were identified as part of a larger ring. The images Miss Hawkins captured, combined with Rowan's testimony in the traps retrieved, led to multiple arrests. Rangers combed the area, finding dozens of snares, many already claimed by victims who couldn't be saved. But some could. With the help of donations and a local wildlife group, Rowan and Dr. Braxton began organizing a small rescue and rehab initiative. It wasn't official. It wasn't funded by any major NGO. But it was real. Tangible. Alive. Rusty's condition improved rapidly. The leg wound, while still stiff, had begun to heal. He walked now, albeit with a limp. He even ventured outside on occasion, circling the cabin, returning of his own accord, free, yet tethered by choice. One evening, Lily arrived with a stack of hand-painted flyers. "What's this?" Rowan asked, eyebrows raised. She beamed. "The beginning of the Rustwood Wildlife Sanctuary." Rowan laughed. He couldn't help it. "Rustwood? It's better than Wolf Hut," she argued. He nodded. "Fair point." They posted the flyers around town, handed them out at the feed store, mailed them to animal lovers and forest rangers. Slowly, the word spread. Volunteers signed up. Donations trickled in. And the name, Rustwood, began to mean something. The forest was still cold. The trees still whispered secrets only the wind could carry. But there was change now. Not just in the land, but in the people. Awareness. Action. Hope. And in Rowan's cabin, by the fire, a wolf slept peacefully, not because he was tame, but because he was safe. The pale sun had barely crested the treetops when Rowan stepped out of his cabin, bundled tightly against the bitter wind that swept across the open clearing. Snow clung to every branch and stone, muffling the world in a deceptive silence. The wolf, still limping but stronger than it had been in weeks, watched him from the doorway, its amber eyes glowing with the faint light of dawn. A fragile trust had formed between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Rowan's breath came out in visible clouds as he crossed the yard to the woodpile. He could feel the tension in the air, the same kind of electric stillness that preceded a storm, not a storm of snow or wind, but of confrontation. The poachers knew someone had been interfering with their traps. Miss Hawkins' article had gone viral days earlier, igniting outrage on social media and sparking an official investigation. But the reality of justice was slower than the wheels of cruelty. The poachers hadn't stopped. If anything, they had grown bolder. A pair of tire tracks had appeared near the trailhead the morning before, too deep, too fresh. Someone had scouted the area, and it hadn't been a ranger. Sensen confirmed that none of their team had been up that way. Rowan's cabin, once a haven of solitude, was no longer safe. And Rusty, as Lily still fondly called the wolf, was no longer just a wounded creature in need of help. He had become a symbol. A target. Rowan took one last look at the tracks leading into the woods, still faint but noticeable through the drifting snow, and then turned back toward the cabin. He knew what he had to do. That afternoon, Sensen and Rowan met at the ranger outpost on the edge of Ashwood. It was a small wooden structure, warmed by a single iron stove and cluttered with maps, walkie-talkies, and handwritten notes. The atmosphere was tense. Dr. Braxton sat quietly in the corner, reviewing veterinary supply lists, while Miss Hawkins paced the floor, her camera slung over her shoulder like a soldier's rifle. "They're coming closer," Rowan said as he entered, his coat dusted in snow. "They're watching the cabin." Sensen frowned. "We're stretched thin. A couple of my team are tracking another set of snares up north. But we've got 2 volunteers willing to help tonight. Locals. Good people. We can't just wait," Miss Hawkins said. "We need to confront them. Get undeniable proof. Names. Faces. And what if they come armed?" Dr. Braxton's voice was quiet but firm. "We're not law enforcement." "No," Rowan replied. "But we're guardians of this land. Of everything they're trying to destroy." There was silence for a moment, thick with tension and unspoken fear. Then Rowan stepped forward and unrolled a hand-drawn map of the surrounding area on the table. "They've been hitting this quadrant hard," he said, pointing to a remote stretch of forest. "We set up motion-triggered cams last week. I got a hit last night." He pulled out a small digital camera from his pocket and displayed a grainy image, 2 figures in heavy winter coats, their faces half covered, standing over what looked like a new snare. One of them was carrying a long object, likely a rifle. "This is our chance," Rowan said. "We wait there tonight. If they show, we catch them red-handed." Sensen nodded. "I'll call in. Maybe get a patrol to sweep the area at dawn. But tonight, it's us." The group left before dusk, armed with cameras, walkie-talkies, and quiet determination. The cold seeped into their bones as they made their way through the forest, guided by headlamps and instinct. Rusty had wanted to follow, he had howled softly when Rowan shut the door, but Rowan couldn't risk the wolf's safety. This mission was too dangerous. They reached the stakeout site by nightfall. A fallen log and a thicket of pine offered cover, and a nearby ridge gave them a clear view of the clearing where the snares had been set. It was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that felt unnatural, like the woods were holding their breath. Miss Hawkins set up her camera on a tripod, its lens trained on the clearing. Dr. Braxton scanned the treetops, visibly nervous, while Sensen checked the ammunition in his emergency flare gun, more for signaling than defense, but it gave a sense of control. Hours passed. Snow fell in light flurries, dusting their hoods and gear. Every twig snap made their hearts race. Every shifting shadow seemed alive. And then, sometime after midnight, a movement. 2 figures emerged from the woods, walking with the confidence of those who believed themselves alone. They wore thick coats, but their gait was aggressive, purposeful. One carried a metal toolbox, the other slung a rifle across his back. Rowan's heart pounded. Miss Hawkins clicked her camera in rapid succession, zooming in. The poachers knelt near the snare site, checking the trap, resetting something. Then came a sound that sent ice down their spines, a howl. Not close, but not far either. Rusty. Rowan's breath caught. He hadn't followed, had he? The poachers froze at the sound. One of them looked up sharply, scanning the tree-line. And then, the flare gun went off. A brilliant red streak lit the sky as Sensen fired upward. It was the signal to alert backup, and to spook the poachers. The figures bolted, but not before Rowan lunged from his hiding place. He tackled one to the ground, the man's face twisted in shock. They struggled in the snow, fists and elbows flying. Rowan felt a sharp pain in his ribs as the poacher struck him with the toolbox, but he held firm. Sensen rushed in, restraining the man while Miss Hawkins trained her camera on his uncovered face. The second man had disappeared into the woods. Got him. Sensen barked. Get the footage. Miss Hawkins didn't answer. She was still snapping pictures, of the man's tattoos, his boots, the wire snare at his feet. Everything. Dr. Braxton rushed to Rowan's side. You're bleeding. I'm fine, he grunted. Just a scrape. But his thoughts weren't on the wound. They were on the howl. By dawn, the authorities had arrived. A state trooper unit, delayed by weather and lack of jurisdiction, finally responded to Miss Hawkins' footage in Sensen's flare. The man they'd caught was identified as Jacob Fielding, a known associate of illegal fur traders. His accomplice, still at large, was being hunted by a search team. The snares were collected. The traps were destroyed. And the footage, graphic, damning, undeniable, was submitted as evidence. Back in Ashwood, Rowan declined medical care and returned to his cabin. Rusty was waiting at the edge of the clearing, his paw still bandaged, his eyes wary. I thought I told you to stay, Rowan murmured, sinking to his knees in the snow. The wolf padded forward and nuzzled him gently, the closest thing to an embrace the animal could give. Rowan wrapped an arm around Rusty's neck and let the tears fall, tears of relief, exhaustion, and gratitude. The aftermath wasn't a victory parade. It was quieter than that. The poaching ring was dismantled over several months, piece by piece, as investigations expanded. The article Miss Hawkins published reached millions. Donations poured into local wildlife rescue programs. Dr. Braxton helped establish a regional rehabilitation center for injured animals. Sensen received a commendation from the state. But for Rowan, the real reward was watching Rusty regain his strength, watching him run again, wild and free, along the tree-line. There came a morning when the wolf stood at the edge of the forest, his eyes on Rowan, and then turned without a sound, disappearing into the wilderness. He did not look back. Rowan stood there for a long time, snow falling gently around him. He understood. Their paths had crossed, their bond forever etched into the snow, the silence, and the soul of the forest. But Rusty belonged to the wild, and Rowan, to the edge of it, a guardian, a witness, and now, a legend. And though their story had ended with a quiet goodbye, its echoes would carry on like the wind through the pines, soft, enduring, and unforgettable. The first snow of March had fallen overnight, blanketing the woods surrounding Rowan's cabin in a silent, ethereal glow. Morning light poured through the trees like golden mist, touching the frosted earth with a strange, gentle warmth. Inside the modest log shelter, the hearth crackled faintly. The wolf, now visibly stronger, lay stretched near the fireplace, his silver and charcoal coat almost shimmering in the amber light. He was no longer the broken, bleeding creature Rowan had rescued weeks ago. His ribs were less prominent, his eyes clearer, and though he still limped, there was grace in his movement now. Rowan, sitting on the floor beside the animal, gently stroked the wolf's shoulder. The act had become a ritual between them, one of quiet understanding, of mutual acknowledgement. He'd stopped calling the wolf merely the wolf. Lily's affectionate nickname had stuck. Rusty. Rusty. A name once given playfully by a teenage girl now felt sacred. Rowan never spoke it aloud in front of others, as if doing so might undo the fragile bond between them. But in the solitude of the cabin, it became a symbol, a reminder of a promise. Not only to the wolf but to himself. Rowan had changed. Since that cold afternoon when he found Rusty trapped and whimpering in the snow, the trajectory of his life had shifted in ways he never imagined. He no longer lived as a mere recluse seeking solitude in the wilderness. His cabin had become a hub, of action, of hope, of planning. Of war. Yes, war. That's what it felt like. The poachers were still out there. Despite the success of their initial stakeout, which had exposed 2 members of the ring and led to the dismantling of several traps, the syndicate's operations had grown bolder. Ranger Sensen had shared disturbing news: fresh snares had been discovered farther north, mutilated animal remains found near illegal camps, and worst of all, reports of automatic gunfire echoing through certain parts of the forest. They were escalating. Miss Hawkins had published a scathing exposé in the Ashwood Sentinel. The article, complete with photographs, names, and interviews, went viral on social media, garnering national attention. Animal rights activists descended upon the region, some carrying banners, others with cameras and drones. Some stayed behind after the initial protests, camping out near wildlife zones, hoping to deter illegal activity. But deterrence wasn't enough. Rowan knew this. The network was vast and ruthless. They wouldn't be stopped by signs or petitions. They operated in the shadows, fueled by greed and protected by silence. The authorities were stretched thin. It would take more than good intentions to dismantle the operation completely. And so Rowan decided to take it a step further. He would infiltrate. One evening, Rowan sat across from Lily, Sensen, Miss Hawkins, and Dr. Braxton in the cabin's dimly lit main room. A hand-drawn map lay between them, with red ink marking recent trap sites and blue circles denoting suspected routes used by the poachers. "We have to go deeper," Rowan said, his voice low but firm. "We know where their camps are. We just need to get inside. Learn their routes, document everything: faces, vehicles, weapons. Enough to make the state get involved. Maybe even the feds." Sensen shook his head. "Rowan, they're dangerous. These aren't just hunters breaking a few rules. They're armed, well-connected. One wrong move, and they'll disappear, or worse." Rowan's gaze drifted toward the fire, where Rusty was curled up. "I owe it to him," he murmured. "And to every creature out there who won't get a second chance." Dr. Braxton leaned forward. "If you're serious, you'll need help. Planning. Resources. You can't just walk into their den." "I'm not going alone," Rowan replied. "And I won't put any of you at risk unless you choose it." Lily nodded before anyone could respond. "I'm in," she said. "They're monsters. And someone needs to stop them." Miss Hawkins looked from Lily to Rowan, then back to the map. "I can get you night vision cameras. Thermal drones. Even contacts in wildlife enforcement. If we play this right, we might be able to catch them transporting illegal goods. That's felony-level stuff." Sensen exhaled, rubbing his temples. "I can't officially help. But I can tell you when rangers will be looking the other way." And so it began. The following weeks were a blur of planning, recon, and preparation. Rowan trained with the equipment Miss Hawkins brought in, learning to fly drones, use discrete GPS trackers, even how to send encrypted video files via satellite. Dr. Braxton taught him basic field medic techniques, should things go sideways. Lily practiced operating the thermal sensors, scanning the woods for heat signatures, while Rowan spent his night studying terrain maps and old hunting records. Rusty, meanwhile, recovered with remarkable speed. His limp remained, but his spirit had returned. He followed Rowan on short hikes, his nose twitching with every strange scent. He seemed aware, on some instinctual level, that the humans around him were preparing for something. And though he could not speak, his presence was grounding. A symbol of what they were fighting for. One night, as Rowan sat outside the cabin sharpening his knife under a star-smeared sky, Rusty lay beside him, ears perked at the sound of distant owls. "We're going in tomorrow," Rowan whispered. "You'll stay here. You've done more than enough." Rusty's golden eyes locked onto his. The wind rustled the trees, and for a moment, Rowan swore he saw something ancient in that gaze. A knowing. A silent blessing. The infiltration mission took place on a moonless night. Rowan and Lily, dressed in forest camouflage, moved through the underbrush toward the edge of Pine Hollow, the area where recent reports had located a large poacher camp. A mile behind them, Sensen waited with a radio. Hawkins monitored drone footage from a van parked a few roads away. They reached the camp just before midnight. Rowan dropped to his stomach, peering through binoculars. There were 3 tents, 1 fire pit, 2 pickup trucks, and at least 4 men, armed, laughing, tossing empty beer cans into the flames. Lily activated the drone. It buzzed softly overhead, unnoticed in the ambient noise. Rowan crawled forward, placing tiny motion sensors near the path, while Lily filmed from a hidden perch. They gathered what they could: faces, license plates, crates marked with illegal trapping tools, and what looked like pelts. Animal pelts. Dozens of them. Then a twig snapped. Both froze. A man looked up. What was that? Rowan's pulse thundered in his ears. Another voice, louder, probably a raccoon. The fire crackled. Boots crunched in the snow. Rowan reached for Lily's hand, whispering, "Run on my count." But before he could say anything, a howl pierced the night air. A long, mournful, commanding howl. From the north. From Rusty. The camp went silent. "Wolves," one man muttered. "Too close. Get the rifles." The distraction was enough. Rowan and Lily slipped into the trees and vanished into the dark. They regrouped an hour later, breathless, hearts racing. They had the footage. The data. The evidence they needed. Rusty had saved them. Somehow, the wolf had known. Back at the cabin, Rowan collapsed to his knees beside the animal and pressed his forehead to Rusty's. "You always know," he whispered. In the days that followed, their team submitted the evidence to multiple agencies. Media coverage exploded. Law enforcement was forced to respond. Within a week, 2 poachers were arrested. Others fled. Camps were dismantled. Traps found and destroyed. Rowan was offered interviews. He declined. He didn't want credit. The real hero lay sleeping near his fireplace, twitching in dreams of snow and stars.